Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday. The long-awaited return for Norwich City action is almost upon us. Burnley tomorrow lunchtime at Carrow Road. And with that, delighted to be joined by my colleague Connor Southwell to look ahead to this one. Connor, to start off the show, just want to get your thoughts on the past couple of weeks. No Norwich City action and very limited activity in the transfer window. So sometimes in our job, we quite enjoy a little bit of a break. But given the sort of positive momentum that Norwich have been riding recently, it feels like we're kind of yearning for football to come back.
Yeah, these things often balance out, don't they? The first half of the season, there were probably games where we were wishing that they weren't games, and now we're in a place where there doesn't feel like there's very many games, but we probably want a game every few days. So it's funny how kind of that is flipped. It's quite a busy month though, so there's a lot of games to look forward to. So you're right, I've kind of viewed it as a nice little break before quite a hectic month now until the international break in March, which of course we really need after a World Cup. So that's great. But no, really looking forward to this one. Feels like ages since we've had a game at Carrow Road, but more specifically a league game since Carrow Road. The last one would have been Watford, would it, at the start of January, I think. So that's mad. And obviously the home record as well. David Wagner hasn't actually managed a championship game at Carrow Road. So all of these factors, the opposition, the size of the game, very, very excited to be at Carrow Road this time tomorrow for that early kickoff.
Yeah, you mentioned there Wagner's first championship game at Carrow Road. How big a game is this for him, Connor? Because it feels like probably the two championship games he's been in charge of so far away at Coventry and Preston, the opposition have been relatively poor, and this feels like probably an opportunity to really register a statement win against probably the league leaders that are going to run away with the title.
Yeah, it's a huge test. It's a huge test for his methods. It's a huge test for where this group is at. I think it's going to be a really good kind of measuring stick, I suppose, if you want to describe it like that, to kind of see how Norwich City are against in what my view is the best team in the league. And I think the league table shows that as well. They're on a run of 8 successive wins in the championship. So all of those statistics make this feel like a really good game to kind of test where they're at and where these players are at. And obviously you throw in as well the record over the first sort of half of the season or so, where their record against teams above them or in and around them has been pretty woeful, to be honest. So all of that context, coupled obviously with a new man in charge, and the newfound positivity that we spoke about, you want to kind of see those elements get proved against a team that has really been flexing its muscles and has really been doing well. So if Norwich are in a position, come about 2-2 tomorrow, where they've picked up 3 points against that Burnley team, that Vincent Kompany team, I think everyone will be sitting back and taking notice of them and talking about what could be achieved in kind of the weeks and months ahead. So not a defining game by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly a really interesting game and a really kind of perfectly poised game. And it's going to be really interesting to see how it's approached by both teams, I think.
Yeah, particularly given Norwich haven't won at Carrow Road since late October, that victory against Stoke. So it really feels like the home crowd need to see a good performance, and let's hope for 4 goals tomorrow afternoon. But let's just move the attention slightly towards one of the new signings through the door, Marquinhos. It's going to play a small clip of what Wagner had to say yesterday, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, obviously the recruitment department has known Marquinhos much more better than I have done, because they followed him for a long period because he played together with Gabi. And when this opportunity popped up, especially after it was clear that Danel probably will leave, and obviously we lost then 3 white players with Tony, Todd and Danel, it was clear that we like to get white players in as well. And everything what I've heard and what I've seen from Marquinhos was quite good. He is now used to England since 6 months. He knows Gabi, what obviously will help to settle in here as well. He's a very technical player, has a good physicality as well. And now it's all about to make sure that he adapts as quick as possible to us and to our training regime as well.
Yeah, David Wagner speaking there about kind of the changes Norwich have made in the flanks. Obviously, Jolis has been recalled as well, so he's someone who's going to be available for the sort of second half of the season now. So, Connor, do you expect these players to be involved in any capacity tomorrow afternoon? But what can they bring over the course of the sort of rest of the season more generally?
Yeah, I think they will be involved. I think he's got a really interesting decision to make. I don't think they'll start, but It wouldn't. I think if you had to pick one of them, I think it was interesting that what he said about Christos Solis yesterday in terms of maybe feeling that he was slightly more ready, just because he's obviously had a little bit of exposure to his methods before he then returned to FC Twente. But I think both will be on the bench, to be honest. But I think we will see both, and it would be incredibly harsh given the form that Onel Hernandez and Kieran Dowell have displayed in recent weeks for them to find themselves out of the team as well, I think. So, and particularly for a new coach who's trying to bring players along with him, I think it's very important that he almost doesn't make that decision at this stage, because he hasn't we're not quite there yet to use that expression there. You have to kind of, I think it's slightly different when you first come in and make those different decisions. But when you've played a player and they've given you something in return, to then drop them out of the team, I think that's a really difficult call to make and to manage. So I would expect to see those two from the start again. I mean, I look at it. I think you look at it. We all look at it. And this is maybe the best way of kind of measuring what they've added. At the start of January, you looked at those wide areas. Compare that to where they are now. I feel they're in a stronger position with the options that they currently have, both in terms of the variety of options, in terms of what sort of players they are, the different kind of players they have in there. You looked at it and felt really that Onel Hernandez was the only one who was a bit of a ball carrier, a bit direct, a bit capable of beating people, maybe a bit more of a conventional winger in that sense. Well, I think Christos Solis, you could certainly put in that mould. I haven't seen enough of Marquinhos to comment, but it feels like he's a bit more technical. So I think you've got different types of players in that area now as well, which they didn't necessarily have before. So really important that they strengthened that area. I think for me, that was the one sort of position in the pitch that I was looking at and feeling that they were a little bit short in, and feeling that they needed at least one option. Obviously, they managed to get two, but they've lost Sinani as well. So I've kind of broken even in that area. So I think it's going to be really interesting. And what it does as well is creates a real level of competition in those areas, because I think everyone's going to be looking at it, probably Onel Hernandez and Kieran Dowell included. I've made a really good start. I've got the shirt at the minute, but actually I've got two guys behind me that one he's brought back from loan because he was very, very keen to bring him back, that perhaps hasn't necessarily been there in recent weeks in those positions as well. So hopefully my connections remain stable there, and you've heard all the answer, but yeah, there we go.
Yeah, we caught the tail end of it, so that's the main thing. Just moving sort of conversation on a little bit with that, adding the caveat that Kieran Dowell and Onel Hernandez are both out of contract in the summer. Do you think these two sort of new arrivals, well, Joel, not a new arrival, but back into the squad, is that going to almost add a little bit of sort of extra hunger for those two that are probably fighting for a contract at the club moving forwards?
Oh, completely. I mean, David Vardy level of performance, then you will earn yourself a new contract. That doesn't become a debate. So absolutely, I think the fact he threw the gauntlet down in the manner that he did at his press conference and said to these players, it was almost, to me, kind of throwing a carrot in front of them and saying, look, you continue to perform at this level and there's the contract, you need to get it yourself. So absolutely adds an extra incentive. And to be fair, Dean Smith spoke about that a little bit as well in terms of what that could do. And I think a lot of people are always keen to talk about the insecurity that having a contract expiring pretty soon does, but it can also have positive benefits as well. Obviously, it depends on the character. I think you find some people get really caught up in the fact that they haven't got long left, and other people really relish the fact. Maybe it depends kind of what camp you're in, but certainly with Kieran Dowell, it feels like we'll get to a stage where he will get a new deal. I kind of expect that to happen. I think Onel Hernandez is maybe a little bit dependent on what division Norwich City find themselves in, the impact Christos Solis makes, because if he comes back and makes a real impact and wrestles the shirt off him at 21, obviously there's Milo Rashica in the background as well, even though it probably doesn't really feel like he's going to be a Norwich City player at the moment. But then 3 or 4 weeks ago, everyone was saying the same about Christos Solis. So football moves very quickly. So all of those factors, I think it's there for them to be won. And they almost, like they do with the competition and the new signings, as we were speaking about there, they have to go and earn it. They hope to go and show why Norwich City should invest into them and their futures. And I think they've got a real chance to do that if they can maintain the form that they've shown in the opening 2 games of this championship reign.
Yeah, just staying on the theme of contracts, there was an announcement yesterday. Adam Idah's got a new contract until the summer of 2028. A player who's there's definitely a bit of talent in there, but probably suffered with injuries at different points. So what did you make of that one, Connor? He's obviously a player that clearly is highly rated, because otherwise you don't get a 5-year contract. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that one, and maybe what does Adam Idah need to do in the rest of the season to really kick on there?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, a massive, massive display of confidence. He now has the longest contract at the club by all accounts in terms of years. I think it's 2026. There's a few players on 2026, and then you jump. I think there's one with an option to 2027, but then you jump to him on 2028. And the way Norwich do contracts, you tend to have kind of 2-year blocks that they kind of do it in. Obviously, we're coming to the end of a 2-year block now. So it's a big investment. I think there will be a lot of people looking at his goal record and purely his goal record and going, well, hang on, I don't really see it. But I mean, I watched him for the 21. You were there as well. We both watched him for the 21s last week. And what really impressed me was his physicality, his size. He looks like he's matured in terms of his own physicality. And I can see why everyone looks at him as being a real talent, because physically he's so accomplished in terms of his power, his size, his pace, his height. He can be pretty good aerially, and he can get in behind. And there's not a lot of strikers that have both of those abilities. You tend to find that actually the nimble ones are relatively short and don't have much aerial presence, and the big ones can't usually run. Let's be honest about it. So, and I was in that category, by the way. So the fact he can do both, and I almost describe him as a complete forward, because I think he's got all of the attributes to kind of be everything you would like, particularly when you talk about lone strikers. I think that's a role that if you could develop him to do that, he could make you a lot of money very, very quickly. And it was interesting, again, listening to David Wagner yesterday, kind of flipped the argument. A lot of people, and you could easily frame the argument to say, well, he's had a lot of injuries and that's really negative. But he was saying, well, actually, it probably shows that he's got now a little bit of he's got some battle scars almost, and he can use those to really help his development and help his maturity and show him what he needs to be a good professional. And I thought that was a very interesting approach. That's not something that we've necessarily heard in the past when people have spoken about lots of injuries. And actually, I felt, and Dean Smith probably said a lot of things that were personally careless to him, but in terms of like outwardly about players, calling him a joint compromised athlete in a public setting in the way that he did was baffling to me at the time, and even more baffling now, because that almost hangs with him forever then. So that was bizarre. But actually the length of contract, I don't really see as being a huge deal. Is big in terms of obviously how big an investment and how big a kind of show of faith it is. But obviously the hope is that Adam Idah does really well and doesn't fulfill that contract, because it will mean that he's got himself a £40 million move somewhere else. That's the objective for everyone here. And I don't think it will take a lot for him to really explode. But we do need to see it, because he's 21 now. And how many times have we had this conversation about it being the time for Adam Idah? Well, eventually he's going to have to put his best foot forward and show that. And I think under David Wagner, he's got someone who's really interested in developing players, really enthusiastic when it comes to that. And we saw that in kind of his comments about Scholes yesterday. But also someone I think who will put their arm around him and make him feel really, really special. And again, has probably made a statement of intent in terms of moving Jordan Hugill on, because he's already seen that he's in that bracket of 3 strikers that he really wants to work with. Throw in just my final points. I know I'm waffling a bit, but throw in the final point of Teemu Pukki's contract as well, which is obviously up in the summer. I think it's really in the balance at the moment, but it does feel tipping. It does feel like it's tipping towards him leaving rather than staying at this stage. Obviously, I think a promotion to the Premier League might completely rejig that, but it just gives Norwich City a bit more security. And actually, let's I don't want to be negative, but let's hypothetically say that they don't achieve promotion to the Premier League this season. Well, they've got the security of having 2 real assets in Josh Sargent and Adam Idah on long-term deals. So that's positive as well. So all of what I've said there hopefully explains why I think Norwich City have got to the position that they have on Adam Idah. It's a big show of faith, and now he needs to repay it. But what an opportunity for him. I think that's the way that it needs to be viewed by everyone.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when he's a player from the academy, that's always a huge plus, to sort of have that sort of connection with the fans. Just moving the conversation from the forward areas to the defence, there's been a little bit of sort of speculation and the fans sort of getting their opinions in on the left-back battle. We've seen both Sam McCallum and Giannoulis both sort of play at different points during the season. At Coventry more recently, we saw Giannoulis play the first half. Wagner pulled him at half-time, mainly down to sort of injury issues. But I thought Sam McCallum done very, very well in the second half. He sort of stopped and nullified the threats that Coventry were sort of, having success down in the first half. So just wanted to get your take on this one, Connor. Who do you expect to be in that left back slot tomorrow lunchtime? We might have lost.
I think it probably will be. Have you got me back? There we go. There we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think it probably will be McCallum because Giannoulis obviously missed a week of training with a slight calf issue, so I think you could lean on that slightly. His performance at Coventry, I agree, was really good. And actually, I think that's an interesting one as we kind of move into the summer. Likewise with the goalkeepers, and I've written about this, that actually at some point you're probably going to have to put all of your eggs in one basket and say, no, you're the one that I'm going to move forward with. I honestly don't believe there's a lot between them. I think there's a hair between them, to be completely honest, and it's really difficult to say who is the better one out of the two. I think they're both very different fullbacks. So I think in the system that David Wagner wants to play, you'd probably look at Dimi Giannoulis as someone who could really flourish in that because of how forward he wants to get, how he wants to join attacking phases. I don't necessarily feel Sam McCallum is as accomplished in that area, but I think Sam McCallum's a better defender than Dimi Giannoulis. But so you've got one player who I think is a better defender and one player who I think is better going forward. So they kind of balance each other off. So if you're Sam McCallum, you probably want him to look a little bit better going forward than he does at times. And Dimi Giannoulis, you want him to look a little bit better going backwards than he does at times. So almost if you could push them in and form one player, you'd have a pretty perfect left back there that would start every week. So I think it's a flip of a coin really, but I think it will probably be McCallum because of the fitness issues. What about you to throw that over? Because I know there's a lot of love for Dimi Giannoulis. So do you kind of see him sticking with Giannoulis? I guess that would be, again, talk about show of faith in Idah. It's a different show of faith, but particularly after the first half at Coventry, which is quite difficult for him. I think maybe it would be good management to stick with Dimi Giannoulis.
Yeah, I think Giannoulis certainly for the system that Wagner wants to play in terms of sort of attacking fullbacks. He tends to probably be the player to fit that profile a little bit better. But then we saw Sam McCallum get the assist for Dowell's goal at Coventry, and I actually thought attacking-wise that was probably one of his better performances. So, yeah, really intrigued to see what he makes of that one because, yeah, as you say, there's not a lot between them, and both have got a case for a reason to start tomorrow. So, intrigued to see what happens at 11:30 tomorrow morning when we hear the team news. Any sort of late comments and questions, get them down in the comment section. We'll come around to those in just a moment. But just looking at the opposition tomorrow, Burnley obviously flying high at the top of the league under Vincent Kompany. His arrival in the summer, I think there was probably a little bit of uncertainty of what we'd get from Burnley this season. Kompany obviously a relatively known name in terms of English football, but not for management reasons. So, Connor, what have you made of Burnley? I mean, 10 wins, 1 defeat since that game in October when Norwich went and lost their 1-0 to that late Jay Rodriguez penalty. So, yeah, what have you made of Burnley so far this season? And maybe are you a little bit surprised that they've been as good as they've been?
Yes, but not necessarily because of they don't have quality in their squad, if that makes sense. I think I looked at it in the summer and thought they've changed a hell of a lot here. And I think the common theme in football is that usually if you change that much and have that much change in a football club, you have to give it a bit of time to work. And obviously some football clubs don't give various projects time to work. So in that regard, what Vincent Kompany has been able to do in terms of take a team, transform its identity on the pitch, recruit in a very different way and bring a lot of players in from a lot of different regions and form this very capable team that was pretty capable of playing the way he wanted to play pretty instantaneously. I think it's a hell of a job that he's done on a coaching level. And also Burnley deserve huge credit as well, because I think there were lots of eyebrows raised when they went down that direction. I think there were probably a few people expecting them to appoint a certain caliber of manager and maybe try and maintain what Sean Dyche has built over a sustained period of time. So they've been the best team in the Championship. I don't think there's any doubt about that. That being said, I don't think they're as good as other title-winning teams have been in the past, and I think that's probably more reflective on where the division is at this moment in time and the quality within it, because I think it's quite closely contested. But those top two, it's hard to argue that they're kind of, you could lump them in with that. I think those two have been a cut above what we've seen in the Championship this season. I just don't think they've been as good as other sides we've seen in the Championship, and I would probably certainly include the last Norwich City title winning side in that. So it's going to be interesting to see how kind of their points tally comes at the end of the season, because it feels like it's going to be quite a big one. They've obviously got a really big lead, and their form kind of speaks for itself, really. They're a team that's capable of winning games ugly, but also capable of winning them in a really attractive manner as well. They have results that you look at and think, yeah, that's a team that's going to win the title. And kind of, I looked at that Coventry one, for example, a couple of weeks ago where they won 1-0. I think it was a late goal in about the 82nd minute. I mean, it's the type of result that you associate with title winners, where they're just able to flip it on a bit of quality. And I think we saw actually the difference in levels in that game in October from where Norwich City were under Dean Smith, obviously, then at that point, to where Burnley were. It was a massive gap. So it's going to be, and this kind of links back to the first sort of conversation we had around the first question, I guess. It's going to be interesting to see how much Norwich have closed that gap, if at all, or if that gap's even got wider. So this is why it makes it such an interesting game. But yeah, huge amount of respect for Vincent Kompany and the job that he's been able to do there, and also just finally a huge respect to anyone of a Burnley persuasion who's making that trip down to Carrow Road tomorrow from midday, because as we know all too well this season, that's a hell of a trek. So yeah, hats off to the Burnley fans who will be coming down. But yeah, really impressed with them, and I think their league position is fully reflective of where they've been and the quality that they've exuded on the division this year. And I think you'd have to be pretty mad to say that they're not going to get a Premier League return at this stage.
Yeah, if anyone wants a little bit of positivity to cling on to, I spoke to a Burnley fan yesterday on Terrace Talk, and he referenced Norwich scoring 8 goals away at Preston and Coventry. Well, Burnley have only scored 1 goal between those 2 games away on the road this season. So maybe Norwich City's goal-scoring form will be key in this one. They obviously are missing Manuel Benson, who's one of their key players as well. So that's probably another huge positive. Connor, just before we go down into the comment section, just want to get your sort of thoughts on what the atmosphere is going to be like tomorrow at Carrow Road. Also, we've seen during the season a lot of sort of difficult spells where it's been very flat. There's been sort of toxic kind of, vibes after games when, Dean Smith, after sort of difficult defeats. So intrigued to know, what your thoughts are on this one. Is it going to be a really sort of big wave of positivity before the game tomorrow that will sort of flow into the game, or do you expect it will maybe be a case of what happens on the pitch?
No, I think it will be really positive, particularly given what David Wagner has been able to do in his opening 2 games in charge. I think, I think that's probably helped matters significantly. So I would expect there to be a huge wave of positivity, but also, and I think we spoke about this in past videos, I think what he's been able to do really, really well is construct a narrative, and like we spoke so many times about that not existing. I think fans do have something to believe in now, not beyond just a style of play, but this idea of being the hunters, and there's almost a slight kind of underdog feeling about the way that he's been able to spin this season, which is really interesting given the amount of expectation that there has been around this Norwich City group throughout the whole campaign. So the fact that he's been able to kind of bring people together, create a connection, but also forge a narrative, and a narrative that people can invest in and feel a part of, I think that's massive, and I think it really helps in terms of getting fans on side, and it's something that Dean Smith wasn't able to cultivate for whatever reason. So I think there will be positivity, and actually I think that positivity will pretty much remain irrespective of the result, because the intent is there with the style of play, but also the type of character he is. He brings people with him, and this is kind of, again, I don't want to keep reflecting on Dean Smith and talking about what he wasn't, because that's really unfair. But I think we're in football management now. You have to be able to kind of represent something and be something and bring people with you and stand for something. And I think he's really good at that. And that's really helpful, because it buys you time, cultivates a really positive atmosphere at home. But also when things aren't going well, it helps you kind of navigate those periods, I think, with a little bit more than kind of the bounciness that maybe we had under Dean Smith, where it was either Norwich had won a game and everything was fantastic, or they lost and it was pretty bad. You can kind of keep a steady medium, if that makes sense. So I think it's going to be really positive. And I was going to tell you my score prediction then, but I'll wait for the question. So I'll end my answer there.
Yeah, I was going to say, get your score predictions down. We'll come around to those in just a moment. Just dipping into the comments before we go there. Joseph Bridgewood asking if we go third tomorrow if we win. Yeah, I think West Brom play this evening, so they can leapfrog Norwich as well tonight. But obviously, being it's the early kickoff, Norwich with a win would rise up to third. Andy Hudson asking on Facebook, who will start up front tomorrow, Connor? 4-3-3, 4-4-2. What's your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, Sergeant Pookie for me. Although it's not really a front. It's kind of a front two, but it's not really a front two. So yeah, it'll be the 4-2-3-1. But I could sit here and explain why it isn't. But it will be a 4-2-3-1. Sergeant slightly behind Pookie.
Yeah, Joseph as well saying he met Sam Byram and he says it's going to be a couple of weeks back to fitness. We did get an update on that yesterday. Wagner didn't really put a timeline on it, but he kind of said March. So just on that one, Colin, do you expect Sam Byram to be the kind of player that's going to get sort of any, sort of inclusive in terms of the team in sort of heading into these latter stages of the season? Or do you think maybe with his contract being up, is that probably his time at Norwich City done?
Yeah, I think it probably is. Unless there's an injury, I guess, to Max Aarons, but even then, I think they've got Jakob Sørensen. They've got other options that they would maybe play in that area. Throw in what Barley Mumba's doing at Plymouth. I think they would look to integrate him next season, particularly if they're in the Championship, and particularly given that there'd be a year left on Max Aarons' contract. So the probability is that they would have to move him on in that scenario as well. So no, I don't really see Sam Byram getting a new contract. I think that might have been slightly different if Dean Smith was still in the building, because he rated him really highly. I think he called him a future Norwich captain at one point, didn't he? So I don't see it now. I think sadly, with the sheer amount of injuries that he's had and setbacks that he's had, it's difficult now to see him kind of coming back from that and playing a major role in this season, which is a shame, because I think every time he has played, he's looked reliable and relatively consistent. So I kind of feel like this is maybe the beginning of the end for him, if that's not too dramatic a term to use. Certainly at Norwich City, not ever, by the way. It made it sound very final.
No, yeah. Let's move it round. Final question, Connor. The one that a lot of people like. Score prediction time. We've got George on YouTube saying 3-1 to City. Joseph as well saying 2-1 Norwich. But it's going to be 4-0, Connor, isn't it? Norwich only score 4 goals in games.
It's true. Well, that's away games, though, isn't it? It might be slightly different at home. I actually do think Norwich are going to win tomorrow. I think it's funny how football works, because the team goes on a run of winning 8 games and suddenly they feel beatable. But when they're on the flip side of that and they've just lost 8 games, it feels like this is like when they face a team that that it's going to be that game that they kind of they find their form. So kind of the way football works tells you that Burnley are going to slip up at some point. I think the rhythm, confidence level that Norwich City are at the moment, and that's the whole club, supporters as well as players, I think they'll be able to get a result, and I think they'll win the game. I'm going to go with Joseph and say 2-1. What about you, Adam?
Yeah, I spoke to the Burnley fan yesterday, and he was kind of saying that they haven't been playing particularly well in recent games. They've sort of been scraping victories, almost what Norwich were doing under Dean Smith at a point, and it felt like probably at some point that was going to break. And I kind of feel that, my head's saying a draw, but my heart says 2-1 Norwich. That's what I went for yesterday, so I'm going to stick with that. I think someone like Josh Sargent, get him on the score sheet again, that would be great for his confidence heading into a fairly good-looking run in terms of fixtures, in terms of where teams are in the league, heading up straight afterwards, sort of into the rest of February. So with that, we'll round off the show. Thanks for joining us this lunchtime. I say, have a great weekend. If you're heading down to Carrow Road, bring the noise, because it feels like this is a really big game, lunchtime kickoff against the league leaders. If Norwich could get a win, then that could really kick them on for the rest of the season. Lots of great content across our channels at the moment. David Wagner's thoughts ahead of this one is up on our YouTube channel. I spoke to a Burnley fan as well, as I've referenced on Terrace Talk. That's for all your insight on the opposition. Connor done a very nice exclusive interview with Jordan Hugill, lots around sort of his relationship with Dean Smith. being a bit, gutted to be leaving Norwich City and why he decided to choose Rotherham United. That's well worth a shot if you haven't listened to that already. And obviously, if you're not a Pink and Plus subscriber, then that's well worth going and have a look at. Free trial, $1.99 a month thereafter. Lots of great content across there as well. Ewan Roberts' latest column is up, and Chris Sutton obviously is a great columnist as well, and lots of other great exclusive content. So yeah, with that, we'll round off the show. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Hopefully Norwich City can provide a win tomorrow, and that would bring lots of great positivity heading into the rest of the season. Thanks for joining us.